did it. Welcome your backup plan on a beautiful week as we are this week in the first summer of the year of 2021. Welcome if you're listening to this on our podcast or a live stream. Welcome to our show, Your Backup Plan Tribe. Thank you for coming on board. Thank you for watching and listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Tina again, and I am with Talking Taboo with Tina. Yeah, that's tough to say. And it all comes to you from your backup plan. I am a podcaster. I am an emergency preparedness coach, a best-selling author, and a financial expert, and an app developer of Your Backup Plan app. And I wrote a book called In the Blink of an Eye. Yes, everything always seems to happen in the blink of an eye. I feel like I dream a genie. Okay, let's go. That's what happens, okay? That's when something happens in your life, changes it totally to you're not really sure where to go, what to do next. And those are the storms that we talk about because we share each week news. We share raw and real conversations each and with our listeners all the time. And it's always a journey from their life-changing event or events, perhaps. So our story today is called Surviving the Storms with My Partner. And we are going to bring Mike Daly in from Connecticut, and what a wonderful, inspiring story, especially this month of June. I feel that it's super important to talk about these things because we don't always just have one storm that we have happen in our lives. We feel we're Superman, but we're really not, but we think we are. And I would like to, we just think it won't happen to me. We don't prepare for the unexpected. We weren't prepared for the pandemic. We weren't prepared for wildfires or hurricanes. When we're given, that 5-minute evacuation notice, it's unbelievable to, what do I take? What do we do next? Yeah, it's crazy. And I've been in that 5-minute evacuation notice, and it really is life-changing. I just wanted to mention your backup plan puts your life all in one place. Everything that's all up in your head into one place in case of any unpredictable circumstance. And it takes that aftermath, that painful aftermath out of a tragedy because you're prepared and you don't have to worry. And you don't have the stress. Yeah. So I'd like to welcome our listeners. Thank you, United States. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Canada, for all our listeners. And thank you, Germany is our next biggest listeners. So meine deutsche Freunde sind in unserem Podcast willkommen. Wenn Sie Kommentare haben, können Sie gern Fragen stellen. Also danke für deine Freundschaft. Thank you so much, my German listeners. Thank you. And Ireland, you're next. And when you get up there, I'm going to have that Irish accent ready. And Sweden too, I have to work on that one. And when you guys come up a little bit, we're having a little competition going here. You'll be next. I'll make sure I speak some Swedish for you. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but okay. So I would like to welcome our wonderful Connecticut guest today. It is going to be very, very huge because Mike didn't have just one storm hit his life. He had many. And we are going to bring him on right now. Hey, Mike.
Hi, how's everybody doing today?
Awesome. I'm just going to give you a little introduction to all our listeners here.
Okay.
So Mike comes to us from beautiful Connecticut. And I would like just, he is an outstanding, and he has an explicit journey that he talks about with the United States Air Force. He is a lawyer, a pilot, of course, a cancer survivor, and yes, definitely part of a journey that left him legally deaf. And I can't believe how many storms you have managed, Mike. Unbelievable. Do you want to tell our listeners how this all started, where it began for you?
Well, it kind of was, we have a plan, or we think we have a plan, or people have a plan for us. So the plan was graduate from high school and go to college. And I was born and raised in New York, all of the Irish kids in New York, where do you go to college? You go to Fordham. And all my first cousins went to Fordham, and of course, I was going to follow those steps. Until I realized I didn't want to go to Fordham. So the first thing was I went home and I broke this news to my parents that I didn't want to go to Fordham, which was the first storm. And little did I realize that wasn't even a storm. The best was yet to come. So when I finally convinced them that a college education was better than no college education, they agreed that I could go to a state university in New York. And then I came home and I told them that I had decided that I wasn't going to go to college because I was going to get married. And that was the big storm. So the question, of course, then became, how is it that you are going to do this? And I said, well, I'm going to enlist in the military, which was wasn't the plan. It was 70s. Southeast Asia was still an issue, and it was difficult. My parents weren't, particularly thrilled at the prospect of, their eldest son enlisting in the military and perhaps finding himself in Southeast Asia. So my father said to me, which is one of the things that has stuck with me through my entire journey, was actions have consequences. And if you take the action, know that whatever comes from that, you are responsible for. You have to address, good, bad, or indifferent. And one of the things that he had said was, this is the day that you go to college. So if you're looking for a college education, you go now, because you have two sisters, you have a brother that's 14 years younger than you. So I have 3 additional children to educate and 2 weddings to pay for, because that's what you did back in the day. And so if you don't go now, don't come home thinking that you can say, okay, I want to go to college now, because your decision not to go now means that when you're ready to go, you figure it out. Well, so that was the first thing I didn't have a plan for. So I went into the military. My father did give me some good advice. He said to me, the military might not be your career, so make sure you figure out what you're going to have them teach you, so that you have a skill that translates when you come out, which was sort of interesting because I got involved with telecommunications and air-to-ground communications. I was very fortunate that I was trained, and my background investigation and everything came back clear, and I was able to get into air-to-ground communications for the National Emergency Airborne Command Post and Air Force One. So I got excellent training. I had a skill that translated, and ultimately, I was stationed back in Washington, D.C., working on presidential communications, when stepping back, before I went to, after I got my training, the wedding was being planned. And that wedding plan didn't go particularly well. And it became apparent that at the ripe old age of 18, I was not ready to be married. And so we broke off the engagement. Sort of interesting, because now my plan has my life has changed, and again, I don't necessarily have a plan, because this wasn't how it was supposed to be. But I made the best of it, and I certainly did not consider not getting married a storm. especially as things begin to unfold. But it was different. It was different, and I wasn't prepared. So I found myself at 18 years old being stationed at what they considered a remote base in Germany, where there was no barracks, there was no housing. I didn't speak German, and I had to buy a car, and I had to find an apartment, and I had to learn to grocery shop because the closest base was about an hour away. But you figure it out. I guess as I go through life, finding out more and more that I can hold on to that actions have consequences. But that only enables me to say, okay, this happened now, and what am I going to do? I have never really reached the point where I need to have an action plan. There's never been a discussion if then what. So I made the best of it. I had a great career. I got transferred back to Washington, D.C., and I met somebody, and it was a man. And I started to come to terms with emotions that I didn't really understand. But I did know that I couldn't stay in the military, because back in the 70s, the theory was if you were in the military and you were gay, you were considered a national security risk. And who's going to be a bigger national security risk than somebody who's working on presidential communications and national airborne emergency airborne command post communications, but me. So I felt like I had a target on my back. So again, we're faced with a change in plan. Thanks to my dad, I didn't necessarily have a plan for what he'd do next, but I was prepared for whatever happened next, because he encouraged me to not look at the military as a career in case I wanted the ability to go out. Well, as I was
now, Mike,
yeah,
is it different now in United States Air Force?
It goes back and forth. I understand they've had the don't ask, don't tell policy, so you could stay in, and as long as you didn't advertise your sexuality, and nobody was allowed to ask you about your sexuality. And then I understand that under the Trump administration, they changed it so that it was not as open and affirming. And quite frankly, but
there you are.
What did I
yeah, you're back. There you go.
Okay.
So, switch it a little bit to your right.
My right. Okay.
Your left.
Okay. Better?
There you go. I can see your head again.
Okay, great.
There's my symbol in the corner, and it's right in your eye there. So
yeah. Let's see.
Shift.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. You're back. So you think it?
Yeah.
You think, there you go. You think it's different now, then?
I think it probably is a little bit different. I mean, back in the 70s, it was an absolute. So when I wasn't going to stick around long enough to find out whether this was a passing phase or for real or not. I mean, I had gone in thinking that I was straight. I signed all the paperwork and everything. And suddenly, you meet somebody and everything turns upside down.
So do you think these feelings just really like they came out of nowhere and you weren't really sure, you weren't understanding yourself? Is that part of the problem, I think, at that point?
Well, I think part of the problem was I wasn't understanding myself. Part of the problem was, I had never considered it. I don't remember particularly being attracted, certainly not that I can recall being attracted to men when I was like in high school or anything, whether that was my own fear, my refusal to acknowledge it, or just not, but it was never anything that I addressed or was concerned with. I mean,
right.
I started dating, I, was in what I thought was a good relationship. I was thinking that I was going to spend the rest of my life with this person. And it was, and it was a traditional, it was a man-woman relationship.
Right.
So it wasn't until I I spent 2 years in Germany on my own. I dated, and then I was transferred to Washington, D.C., and I dated, and I met somebody that I became friends with that just led me to have a different set of emotion, not understand what was happening to me, knowing that it wasn't a one afternoon or a 1 week thing. It was an issue that remained in the forefront. It caused me a lot of concern, both because I didn't know how to deal with it. Plus, I didn't know if it was reciprocal. And honestly, at that point in time, I didn't know how to find out if it was. So, but I did know that it was occupying enough of my time and thoughts to be taken seriously, which meant that I didn't believe that I had a future in the military. Despite the fact, and as I made the decision to leave the military, a lot of people were saying to me, but Mike, you've got a good career. I was in a very a field where I was always going to be comfortable, a field that I knew where I would be transferred. I had been promoted as quickly as possible. I had made all my promotions the first time I was eligible. So from both a career advancement perspective, as well as a technical perspective, and I had started to go to college when I was in Washington, D.C. I was taking my classes at University of Maryland. Everything seemed on track, but for this other feeling, and it actually was, and the other overriding theme in my life is everybody's named Mike. So my name is Mike. The gentleman that I found myself wanting to be romantic involved with, his name was Mike, and it was his father that actually gives rise to my second mantra. So his father, who I met a bunch of times, couldn't understand why I wanted to get out of the military, and I couldn't tell him. What am I supposed to say? I think I might have a crush on your son.
So, that's kind of awkward, right?
Yeah, and
it kind of puts me in this awkward position now.
Right. So you can't say that, but so basically he said, what are you going to do when I said, I'm not finished my degree, and who knows, maybe I'll go to graduate school, maybe I'll go to law school. And then I immediately said to him, but people like me don't go to law school, so I'll probably just get my degree and get a job and do something. So he said to me, what do you mean people like you don't go to law school? He said, when you're my age and you say to yourself, gee whiz, I wonder why I'd go to law school. He said, I want you to just get up and go and look in the mirror, because there's your answer. Because the only thing stopping you from doing anything is yourself. And when you accomplish something, I want you to get up. When you say, gee, I wonder how that happened or how I did that or anything, you need to get up and go look in the mirror again, because there's your answer. You did it. So I had both of these ideas, actions have consequences, which I took to heart. And then if you don't do something or do accomplish something, it's because you did it or you told yourself you couldn't do it. But there was still no plan. There was still no if you try, and there was never a discussion if you try and it doesn't work out, whether because the person in the mirror couldn't control the outcome, which I found out later on, or the need for a backup plan. So despite the fact that everything in my life kept changing, I would recognize that the action or the change had a consequence. I would also recognize that I'm responsible for it, but would then react and figure out, okay, what's the next step? So I came out of the military and I got a job working for American Airlines. And it was a good run. I mean, while I was there, I came to terms with what I was feeling, realized that I was in fact gay.
So it gave you a little bit of space to to allow your career to continue, but allow space for your emotions and feelings to figure out where you're at with that.
Right. And it was actually kind of funny because I had breathing room. There was no pressure. There was no pressure to date. There was no pressure to not date. I could just be open to the possibility. And I was able to support myself. So I was in a position where I could continue my education and I could move forward with my life in whatever direction it went, still not having a plan. So I met somebody whose name also is Mike, and we dated for many, many months before I could even decide what it was that I wanted to do, that I could be sure that this was what I wanted. Fortunately, he was very patient. That was kind of our first storm. I think he many times was scratching his head saying, what are you doing with this lunatic who can't make up his mind about anything? But,
and you obviously have a thing for Mikes.
Oh, that's, everybody was Mike. But fortunately, he was patient. He dealt with me. He kind of waited until I sort of figured things out. I was ready to make the move. And it would, now looking back 43 years later, it obviously was the right, we were supposed to be together because, he became my support. I became his support. And, we decided to make a certain commitment. And it's interesting because when we made that commitment, that was probably the only time in my life I've had we bought one home and we bought a second home, and we went through all of the legal mechanics that we needed to go to be sure that we could, if there was an illness, we had access to each other, that we were able to make decisions with respect to each other's care. We could make decisions with respect to each other's finances, as well as our own. And we both had conversations with our families, so interestingly enough, not about the nature of our relationship, just the fact that we had invested together and everything. And so if anything happened, nobody's family should expect anything because everything was going to the other. And it was sort of interesting because my parents never asked any questions, neither did he. The two families came together like any other relationship. Yeah. Mike's folks and Mike were seated at my parents' table for both my sister and my brother's weddings. My parents became friends with his parents. We spent holidays together, and nobody ever asked any questions about what the nature of our relationship was. Everybody just accepted it. So from that respect, I think I was pretty lucky because it was one big change in my life that I didn't have to plan for, because I know so many people that have had, issues with their family, issues with their siblings, issues with their social network and everything. And, Mike and I were pretty charmed. Our parents accepted us. We made the decision when we bought a home, we weren't going to tell people that we had separate rooms or anything. We weren't going to advertise the situation to the neighbors and to the community at large, but we weren't going to deny it, and we weren't going to talk about going away with someone or doing something with someone. It was always Mike and Mike, and if people chose to question us, we would answer them, and if people chose not to question us, we were going to let them accept whatever was going on in their own terms. So it was sort of interesting because nobody in either family ever asked anything.
That's really nice, isn't it, when you think about it? Because there's so many who doesn't have family issues?
Right.
Right. So especially with same-sex partnerships, and trying, I think it's even more important to have a financial and not even just a spiritual, but a financial plan of small and big things in your life, more organized than the average heterosexual partnership, because of the ability to make a plan together. And I think what happens when a man and woman get married, they don't really get all that stuff together normally. Like they just get on with their lives. They did their wedding, they did their whatever, their parties, and then they just both work and go on from there. But I really like how you said that you try to get your life organized with each other. And that's super important.
Well, it was important. And one of the reasons that it was important is because the law, there was no mechanism to do it for us. A traditional, we never had the opportunity to have a traditional marriage. The law didn't recognize our relationship. So if something happened to me or something happened to Mike, and we didn't have those documents in place, it would have been impossible, absent our families recognizing our relationship and agreeing, for us to take care of each other. We could have life insurance, but what happens with all of that stuff? Or for that matter, what happens as later on when I found out that I had cancer and stuff, what happens when those decisions need to be made and everything? So we were all very much aware of the fact that we needed those protections. And that was one of the things kind of that really cemented our relationship, was, our concern about those things. And, those are pretty major life decisions when you start buying homes together and planning, not relying on the law to take care of you, but relying on each other to affirmatively take those steps and take that time to make sure that the other person is taken care of. I think what happens is that cements the relationship in a different sort of a way than a traditional marriage and stuff, because it says to a certain extent, I'm all in. And that's one of the ways when you don't have a solemnized or a legal wedding. I think that's one of the ways that you show your partner that you're all in.
But we all should do that.
Well,
it doesn't matter what laws are in place, really, right? We should all be thinking about, okay, I want to make sure you're going to be okay. I want to make sure that I'm going to be okay if I get sick. And, can you look after me? Would you be able, looking at all of those viewpoints. Mm-hmm. And that's so awesome and I just wish everybody did that, whether there's a law or not. The laws change and we need to be better prepared.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So when we bought the house and everything, we knew that we were going to need to plan. We both, we had our first house, which is where Mike's folks lived, and we had the second house. I just knew that we really kind of needed to plan for that. And then, I finished college, and it was sort of interesting because then it became the discussion of what's next. Are you going to stay at American Airlines? Are you, and if you are, what's your career path? And one of the things was, because we both worked in very different departments, I was on the technical side and he was on, and believe it or not, you'll kind of laugh, Tina, knowing that the challenges to get my cell phone to work and do this podcast, I was actually doing data processing equipment and computer system design and everything. But that was many years ago, and that was a very different world. And now it's sort of funny how, once again, I guess I should have stayed up on the technology, because then I could work my cell phone and I wouldn't have tortured you the way I did with you, trying to get up on the air and do this podcast.
Well, things change every year. You just can't keep up, Mike. It's all cool. It's all cool. Thank goodness I have my background in Microsoft certified systems engineer. So
there you go.
It was all troubleshooting. Absolutely. Yeah. So not a problem.
Yeah. So we decided, so what do you do next? I was in my late 20s. I didn't particularly feature myself staying in the same job till I was 65 years old. Mike and I were in different areas, so it wasn't a transfer within the company together wouldn't have been the easiest thing to do. And even if it did, my job would have stayed the same. His might have changed, but my job would have stayed the same. So I decided to go to graduate school, and I went to law school. And so for the next 3 years, once again, it was kind of all about me. I worked full time, so I contributed
Wow.
to the household and stuff. So the way that things would work out was, I would get up in the morning, I would study, I would go to school, I'd leave school, and I would drive into Hartford and I would work, usually from like 5 o'clock in the evening until 1 o'clock in the morning, doing computer simulations and other things. And then I would go home and I would fall asleep and I would get up in the same routine. And then the weekends were pretty much dedicated to, studying, catching up, and we were in the middle of, work renovating a home. But what we could afford, which was a handyman special. So many weekends, or many nights after work, or many weekends, the goal was to just get a couple of sheets of sheetrock up on the walls or anything. And ultimately, we finished right before we graduated from law school. We finished renovating the house. So
Wow.
there was a lot of stuff going on, and things weren't particularly always easy, because in the middle of that, I wasn't feeling very well. And I was talking to my mother, who was a diabetic, and I kind
Hmm.
of told her how I was feeling, and she kind of raised her eyebrows and made an appointment for me with her endocrinologist. And when they brought me in and started doing the testing, I rang all the bells. And so, in the middle of going to graduate school, in the middle of renovating a house, in the middle of trying to get everything, I found out that I was a type 1 diabetic, and I needed to learn how to adjust my diet, adjust my exercise, manage my sleep, and everything around the need to give myself shots.
Yeah.
um, which was a very big deal. It was a big lifestyle change. And, as always, it was all about me, no plan, no discussion about what happens if either one of us ever gets serious illness. But fortunately, Mike was there. Mike rolled with it. Mike took the time. He learned, probably, he was more willing and open to learn than I was, because I was much more comfortable denying it. And I recognized that in many ways I was fortunate, because it didn't happen to me when I was 17, and it didn't happen to me when I was 20, when, you want to
Yeah.
go out and have pizza and you want to just kind of do what all of your friends are doing, because that's the most important thing.
Hmm.
Other than trying to figure out if you're gay or straight. But
Yeah.
I could keep the secret. I didn't have, but being a diabetic, you can't keep it a secret. So, as always, Mike came through with the master plan. Mike came through and said, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We don't have a plan. We didn't plan for you to be
Yeah.
a diabetic. Maybe we should have planned, because my mother was a diabetic, but, we didn't. So once again, he stepped up and, do what you have to do, which goes
But
back to,
while you were doing all those things, you were probably eating wrong and you were probably not
right.
exercising, right? So it said, check your health, Mike.
Yeah. So suddenly, instead of being able to grab a Burger King on my way from Springfield to Hartford to go to work, it became either finding a place where I could get a reasonable meal, or planning in the midst of everything to have food with me.
Mhm.
That was not going to, was not going to tip the scale. And there was also a lot of coming to terms. I mean, Mike had to pay close attention to me, because oftentimes, if your blood, especially if it's going very low, you don't necessarily realize it. And that's actually much more dangerous in the immediate than high blood sugar. High blood sugar will affect you over time. A low blood sugar, in essence, makes you incapable of operating a motor vehicle or anything. So he really had to be very much on the ball, and it was incredibly stressful, because there weren't, now we're talking about the mid 80s. There weren't car phones. There
No.
weren't cell phones. He couldn't call and say, "Did you remember to eat?" He couldn't call and say, "How are you feeling?" or anything else. So and I was gone from 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning until midnight or 1 o'clock So there was a lot of stress, and there was no plan, other than when I got to work. Obviously, I would make it a point to call him and say, or I'd see him in the building. But once again, we had no plan, which takes me back to my two mantras, which probably are not, they're okay, but there should be a third, which is make a plan, which is actions have consequences, and and you got to make it work, and you are responsible for yourself. If it goes right, you look in the mirror. If it goes wrong, you look in the mirror. So, but still no plan.
Yeah.
So I was fortunately, so even when you're thinking about this, where your life is going to change. I was going to law school. Nobody was under the impression that I was going to continue at American Airlines as an attorney, but there was no plan. There was no, well, where do you want to work? Don't know. What kind of job do you want to do? Don't know. What kind of law do you want to practice? I want to do estate planning and taxes. Well, that didn't fit with my personality at all. I had been out in the community. I was working. I was a born networker. I thrived on meeting new people and new experiences and everything. And there I was, putting myself into a position where I would be miserable. The last thing I could do is sit in a room by myself and draft documents and do that other stuff. Lots of people thrive on it, but I need the social, I need the outlet. But even as we went through 3 years of law school, there was never a discussion. The plan was that I was going to graduate, and the long-term plan was I was going to be a lawyer. That was it. So when fortunately, I was very lucky when the master plan had been to take my last school course. We were going to go to Europe, take a vacation, and then we were going to come back, and I was going to resign from the company, which would have terminated my flight benefits and my health insurance and a whole lot of other stuff. No, we didn't talk about getting health insurance. No, we didn't shop around, and we had a diabetic in the house who was going to be unemployed, who didn't make any plans for health insurance. But once again, I got lucky because the end of in the middle of the third year of law school, the company offered a severance package that included a year's salary, and it included lifetime health and medical insurance, and I qualified. So even though we knew that we should have had a plan, we chose to not focus on it, and we got lucky. We got lucky because what ultimately happened was I was able to leave the company in March instead of waiting till May, and I was able to leave with money to tide us over, as well as health insurance that was so critical for my medical issues. But no plan. And, when I came out, I passed the bar and I found a job, and I tried my hand at estate planning and tax law for probably about 60 days. Fortunately, we had a litigator in the same firm who took me to court with him, and I took to that like a duck to the water. So I, for almost 30 years, was a litigator. But still no plan.
And you're with people, though, so it was right up your alley.
Well, yeah, it was right up my alley because I was out networking, trying to find business, make connections, meet potential clients. I, was gregarious and I was outgoing, and as you can tell, I like to talk, and I enjoy problem solving. My idea of an enjoyable evening, if I'm just by myself, is, I used to follow the Supreme Court like many people follow the New York Yankees. So I don't mind sitting there and speculating on, what's Neil Gorsuch going to do, what's Sotomayor going to do, and everything, and then reading a decision or reading a book about the philosophy of the law or anything else. So, it was great.
If you like that.
If you like that, yeah. And fortunately, I did. I mean, I also like the New York Yankees, but but I liked doing that. So it was, so it was good, and I enjoyed it. And the putting the argument together and having a client come to you, and tell you what their issues are, and you figuring out the strengths and the weaknesses and making recommendations. You also need a plan for that. And you don't, because law school doesn't train you for any of that. Law school doesn't prepare you for the prospect of people trusting their lives to you and you making decisions. You don't make the decision, you make the recommendation, but you make a recommendation and you say you should do this because, and you're not usually, whether it's a financial issue or it's a marital issue or anything else, people aren't necessarily in the best position to make those decisions. So you do find yourself guiding people through their lives, and nothing prepares you for the emotional toll that takes, because you go home at night. You go home at night and your life remains the same, but all of those people whose lives you touched, they are not the same. Oftentimes they're very, very different. If you're, when I started out litigating in a general practice, and I was doing divorce work, and it used to frighten me because, you get into the, into a courtroom and you'd settle something, and there would be a lot of pressure for you to not only settle the case, but to resolve it that day. And I didn't like to do that because you don't know, something sounds good, but you need to live with it. You need to figure it out.
Right.
And so I kind of had a lot of people aggravated because I'd say, yep, I think we've got a deal and we'll finalize it next week. And I would tell my client, you go home and you live with it and you think it and, and everything. So I just want you to, which wasn't popular. So then you were swimming upstream.
Yeah.
But I found my niche. And things were going.
And it was going well. And then something else hit.
Right. So that it was going well. And then we came back from Europe, and I had an odd growth on my back, and somebody pointed it out to me, and I scratched it and it bled. And Mike said to me, you need to get that checked out. So I came home the next day from work, and it was like, you need to get that checked out. And they came home the next day, and Mike said, have you made an appointment yet? Now, we had a very good friend that was a physician, and he was a surgeon. So the thought was I should just call Tom. He'll cut it off, and that will probably be it. So finally, I came home after about a week, and Mike said, okay, so this is how it works. You either make that appointment based on your schedule, or I don't care if you're planning to be in front of the United States Supreme Court. If I have to make that appointment, you don't come out of here. And we never talked about what it was. We never talked about what it could be. It was an annoyance. So I made sure that I called, and I made an appointment, and I went in and I had it taken out. And this friend of ours, Tom, said, not a problem, Mike, you're fine. Nothing to worry about. I think, we had mutual friends, and one of their daughters was getting married, and he said to me, I'm sure I'll see you at Amy's wedding. Give my best, and we'll talk soon. And about 4 days later, I was in the office, and I got a call, and I was a smoker at the time.
Oh.
I smoked from the time I was 14 or 15. In the military, smoking then was a big deal because you got to get out of formation. The old term, smoke if you got it. So it was great. Little did we know then what we know now. But anyway, so I'm in my office, and I get a call from Tom, and he says, I want to see you, Michael, tonight. And I said, what's going on? He says, I don't want to talk about it. I'll discuss it with you guys tonight. And I was like, well, if you don't tell me why I'm coming, I'm not going to come. So he told me that, I had a fairly dire diagnosis, and that I had a form of cancer that, was pretty violent and was spread. And he needed to talk to us about what our options were. and how we wanted to approach this. And he wanted to make arrangements for to see both scheduled surgery and also to see an oncologist. So I kind of had to then figure out how I call Mike and tell him this, without dropping a bomb on him on the phone.
And what year are we talking about for this?
At this point, we're talking about 2004.
Okay.
We had kind of coasted. I graduated from law school in 1988. We had our home. We bought a larger home. We sold a home. Things were going well. Life was good. I was very fortunate. Mike and I were traveling. We both had flight benefits from American Airlines. Everything was going well. We weren't struggling to put anybody through school.
Yeah. You had more time.
We had more time. We were spending more time together. Unfortunately, we weren't spending any time talking about the next phase or what if or anything. Like every couple, we had our good days. We had our bad days. We had some days where I'm sure probably more than me scratched his head and said, what have I done here? But during that time, we lost Mom to cancer, and so there was good times and there were bad times. Life happened.
Life.
So, but we had never discussed what was going to happen if one of us had serious illness. We never discussed what was going to happen if one of us, God forbid, had cancer. We didn't think that those things would happen to us. Or I don't know if we didn't think they wouldn't happen to us, or we just didn't think. So yeah. I called Mike and I said, Tom wants to see us, and we went in and he kind of outlined his concerns were, and the fact that I needed surgery, and the fact that I needed to go into chemotherapy and stuff. So what do you do? What happened, believe it or not, was my dad was in hospice at that point. And so I was told this, and I was told that, we give you a diagnosis. They also say, don't go on the internet and don't do this and don't do that. And I didn't do any of that, but Mike did. So he also knew that that my chances of survival were not very good. And
why is that? Did they ever say why?
Well, because the form of cancer that I had it doesn't act normally as a cancer does, and it's also very aggressive and it's virulent. So normally what happens is, because asymptomatic at the beginning, it's usually metastasized to other organs and at other places in your system before it's ever diagnosed and treated.
Before it's shown its little head.
Right. So, and at that point, they didn't know what my prognosis was specific to me. They only knew the form of cancer based on the biopsy and everything, and the prognosis wasn't good. But unfortunately, I had to stop. I couldn't go through treatment because the following morning I got notified by my father's physicians that I needed to have a meeting and sign hospice papers for him. So I signed the hospice papers and I called my doctor and I said, I got to wait. My mother's got Parkinson's disease and I've got to take care of this, which, again, what are you going to do? No master plan. We didn't plan for cancer. We didn't plan for my father. We certainly didn't plan for them to both happen in the same week. The doctor was pretty upset. He was like, Mike, every day matters. And I was like, yeah, but these days matter in a very different way. So we got my father taken care of, and I went in and I
started your treatment.
Started my treatment. Had some issues along the way, like everybody does. You sit in we used to call it the Big Red Chair Club. You sit in those great big fluffy recliners. They're all red, and they I couldn't let cancer control me. The deal really was that Mike came to every single doctor's appointment. He came to every single scan. He came to every single chemotherapy treatment and everything. But I was struggling because I felt like for the first time in my life, I had no control. So for the guy that needed to recognize that actions had consequences and that I was responsible for those consequences, and that if it was good or bad, however it turned out, I needed to look in the mirror, but I had no plan. I was floundering. I was floundering. Plus the fact that I was a bit of a control freak. So I decided that cancer wasn't going to control me. I was going to show the world that I could control it. So the first thing that I started to do was I started to ride a bicycle. Not that I ever thought I was going to be Lance Armstrong and I was never going to ride in the Tour de France, but that I could do it. And what I started doing was I would ride to my chemotherapy treatments, which was almost 80 miles one way. And I would try to ride home, and I'd get usually about halfway. And then I would call Mike and say, I'm done. And we'd have a point. I'd load the bike in the car and we would come home, and we were dealing, with all of the stuff that you learn about cancer, the nausea, the vomiting, the body aches, the inability to eat. I lost a lot of weight. I didn't want to eat. I had no appetite. And the game we used to play was we used to go to a restaurant that had mud pie. Mud pie was a big treat because it didn't taste like tin, and it was cool in my mouth, and I was getting sores and I was getting blisters and everything else. But the deal was I had to have meat and vegetables before I could have the mud pie. So it became a bribery thing. And so one thing leads to another. So now I'm riding the bike and going through these chemotherapy treatments and stuff. And I decide that I'm going to ride in the Lance Armstrong Ride for the Roses in Austin, Texas. So now I'm training for a 100-mile ride because cancer's not going to control me. I'm going to control it. And also it gave me an opportunity to raise money for cancer survivorship program across the country, people learning how to live with cancer. Because one of the things that I realized is that, they can cut the cancer out of your body. They can't ever cut the cancer out of your mind. So I became very much the scanxiety, the fear, the something bothers me, or I got the strange pain. Is it back? And everything. And I was having a fair amount of side effects. I got the chicken pox, I got shingles. Wow. I had a lot of, but every day I went to chemotherapy, I rode my bike and I would go to chemotherapy and I would have a joke. Many, many days they were filthy jokes. But do
you have a joke for us today?
Not one that you want me to put on your podcast. But because none of us had, we all, the group of us became so close that there was no filter, there was no barrier. We just communicated. So one of the goals that Mike and I always had was to, and I will tell you a quick story. One of the jokes, we would have the jokes just to make people laugh. Because the other thing is you never knew. You would go there sometimes and there'd be an empty chair.
Uh-oh.
And
one of your team went missing.
Yeah. And you almost didn't want to ask because you kind of hoped that they were just in the hospital. But, so Mike and I became recognized as, the guys, and we would make a lot of noise. We'd be noisemakers and we would have all of our jokes and everything else. And one day, one of the aides came and she brought us, believe it or not, tortellini and sausages for lunch. Well, when you see tortellinis in a bowl, at least I did because I'm very sick, I have a very sick sense of humor. I immediately thought that, I said to her, what are you expecting us to eat? Is this the medical waste from the pediatrics lounge? Have you collected up all the foreskins and thrown them in a bowl? Mm-hmm. That's what tortellini look like. And that became everybody's war cry. And she was like, I don't believe it. I said, and then you served it with a sausage, and when I go back there now for my checkups and everything. They still tell that story and how they would never serve tortellini and sausage on the same day in the infusion center. But but it was hard. It was very hard. But so the fundraising became a big goal, became very important to me.
Yeah.
And then what happened was I had an opportunity to work with a cancer survivorship. So I'm riding my bike, going for chemotherapy. I'm trying to run this practice, this law practice, and now I'm trying to raise money. And then they tell me that's a cancer survivorship organization located in Connecticut. So I reach out to them and they have a ride. So now I'm riding in 2 rides. I'm going to Austin, Texas. I'm packing Mike up and we're flying to Austin, Texas. He's not riding a bike and I'm riding 100 miles. He doesn't know what's going on. I'm still going through chemotherapy treatments. I'm telling him that I'm fine so that I can do this. Right. And he's doing things like taking a tour of Texas Capitol while he doesn't know what I'm doing or if I'm okay. Fortunately, by that time we had we had cell phones, so I could stay in contact with and stuff. Came back and I was riding to this organization in Connecticut, and the doctors told me very specifically, you're limited to 50 miles. But a friend of mine who was very successful, they owned a company and everything, offered if I could ride the 100, he would match everything I raised. In that particular year, I had raised $35,000. So it was huge to get a $70,000, to get a $35,000 match. But I had to coerce my friends to lie so that we made a mistake and misread the sign when you turn one way in a bike race to go the shorter loop and you turn the other way to go the longer route. We all agreed that I was just going to make the mistake and they were going to follow, because they also didn't want me riding alone. And then I was working at the Children's Hospital with the pediatric, and that led me to the Hole in the Wall gang camp. So what ultimately happened was cancer. I had no plan. I was reacting on a day-to-day basis to my inability to control my life. And suddenly I started making mistakes at work. And it was all starting, it was getting too much because there was no plan. So each day I had a plan to get through the day or the next thing, but it was always to show cancer, never to show me, never to show Mike, never to show anybody else that I was in control. It was always really to show cancer. And I didn't recognize what was going on. And what happens when you get in that situation is the person that's closest to you in the world, in my case, Mike, would say to me, Mike, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
You've got too many irons in the fire. He used to say, he says, you're behaving like Don Quixote. You've got your lance and you're charging at windmills. Mike, you can't control this. Mike, the way that you control this is that you take care of yourself. You take care of us. You come home at night, you sleep, you rest. You don't find another project that you somehow convince yourself that cancer is not controlling you, because you can do that yourself. So we had almost the perfect storm, because we had actions have consequences. We have, if you want to do it and you do it, go look in the mirror. And if you don't do it and you go look in the mirror, but we have no plan. So my plan to beat cancer was to beat it every day at what I was doing. So I made some mistakes in my practice, which caused a whole host of additional problems. And then I happened to mention one day to my secretary, I'm one of these guys, as you can tell, that, always talks and my hands are going and everything else. And I would do the, hey, Jen, get this. Hey, Jen, what do you think about this? She was my, the person that worked directly for me. I mean, I had 6 people working for me. So there was also that pressure to keep the firm going, because I had payroll of these people that depended on me to pay their bills, that depended on me to provide them with health insurance and everything. So one day I walked out and I said to her, I noticed that when I'd yell out, hey, Jen, could you get me this file or something? Or I'd ask a question, nobody was answering my questions. So I walked out and I said, hey, Jen, what? Are you going deaf? Can't you hear me? And she said, I've been waiting to have this conversation. Let's go in your office. And she said, I'm going deaf, but I think you probably are. And I said, what are you? You're crazy. And she says, no, I've spoken to Michael about it. You know, when we had this conversation, I'm going to tell you that I want you to have your hearing checked. So you're nuts. I had just finished a trial. I had just gotten a verdict. How could I not hear? And still, no plan. I didn't have a succession plan. I didn't have a plan to how to wind down my practice. I didn't have any plan for what to do if I couldn't practice.
Or a partner that could, yeah.
And now they're telling me that not only am I coming out of chemotherapy finally, and I'm thinking I won because I did all of this stuff. Forget about the fact that I was leaving a trail behind me of things that I wasn't focused on correctly, including my relationship. I mean, you know, I wasn't, obviously, when you're doing all of the lunatic stuff that I'm doing, I wasn't paying attention to Mike. But he stuck with me. And we had no plan for how we were going to deal with chemotherapy or anything. And, fortunately, I was able to make money. And fortunately, he was able to manage money. And those were the roles, out of plan, those were the roles we adopted, which put us in a position where we could weather that storm, both financially and everything else. So they want me to get my hearing aid. So I'm just getting out of chemotherapy. And I'm just thinking that I'm going to get my life back.
Yeah.
And now they're telling me I can't hear, and I can hear. So I'm going to humor them. They want me to go get my ears checked. I'll humor them. I'll go get my ears checked. So I go and they test my hearing, and I'm at probably 30%, 30 to 40%. I'm hearing 30 to 40% of what goes on. I'm like, that's impossible. I can hear fine. And they're like, no, you can't hear, Mike. So now I'm dealing with the fallout from finishing chemotherapy, and now I'm going deaf.
And is this caused from chemo or the drugs?
It was a result from, it was one of the chemotherapy drugs that initially they didn't find out what it was. They just knew that my hearing was decreasing and then over time we found that other patients that were on the same types of drugs were experiencing similar issues. So the way they convinced me that I couldn't hear, because I refused to accept I was trying cases. I was riding my bike. I was communicating with people. And my thing was, if I'm deaf, how am I doing that? Yeah. So, but like my assistant Jen said, but Mike, you don't talk on the phone anymore. You talk on a speakerphone. And it's very loud and they can hear it down the block. So there were all these little changes going on. I was yelling to them like I always did, get me this, or what do you think of this? Or, where do I have to be? And I wasn't hearing any answers, but it was never me. It was them.
It's funny how your body just assimilates to whatever, if your eyesight starts going, your body just manages it. Like you don't even realize it. And your hearing's the same. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
So what they did was when they told me I needed to get hearing aids. So I said, sure, I'm going to appease Mike because God knows, he's been through enough. He's telling me that I need to get hearing aids. I should get hearing aids. I'm thinking to myself, getting hearing aids is a small price to pay. I'll just keep them in the glove box in the car. So, but what they did, unbeknownst to me, was they told him, that when they fitted me for the ear molds, they wanted, when I was distracted, they wanted him to slide back so that I couldn't see him. And when they took the ear molds out and we began to converse again, they wanted him to create a disruption to get my reaction. Well, there was no reaction. So he was sitting behind me and he was clapping his hands and he was calling me names and he was counting and he was doing all kinds of things, but I didn't hear any of it. And what we found out was that my hearing was that bad. What I had done was I had subconsciously learned how to read lips. So what, like, and you just don't realize, like he would say to me, I realized that, when we were riding in the car, you don't want to drive anymore. And I would sit sideways. I put my seatbelt on, but I always sat sideways. So I was always looking at him. I changed the seating in the house. I didn't sit where I used to sit. I always used to sit on the couch next to him. Now suddenly I'm sitting in a chair at an angle to him. All these things were happening, but I had no idea that was happening or anything else. And what ultimately happened was I made so many mistakes in my practice that I had to shut it down.
Oh dear.
I couldn't hear, I couldn't litigate, I couldn't go into court and read people's lips. So, and no plan, no retirement plan, no nothing. As this was going on, a friend of mine, and I'll spare you all of the details, except to say that to you that I was going down and I was helping him every day because he was going through a divorce that had him completely incapacitated. I was talking to his brother and I was saying, Sam needs help. Sam needs help. He should be inpatient. He was suffering from severe depression and everything. This was a guy that was 10 times smarter than me. He was the valedictorian of my law school class and everything else. He ultimately took his own life and took the life of both of his children and his wife. So that just kind of completely destroyed me because I felt so responsible. I was talking to this guy every day. I was going down. I was taking him to a psychologist because I couldn't take him to a psychiatrist because if he was on medication and seeing a psychiatrist, he wouldn't be able to have unsupervised visitation. And I'm saying to myself, so is the law telling us that it's better to stay broken than to get fixed? Stay broken, you can see your kids. Get the help that you need. You're not allowed to spend time alone with your kids. Is that what happens? And at the same time, I had a very well-known litigator that wanted to represent me against my physician and the drug company that they suspect caused my deafness. And he said, and I said to him, well, but that doesn't work. I met with him and I said, that's not going to work because, first of all, I don't want to sue these people. These people saved my life. I had I'm still here. And granted, I'm going to the dermatologist every 45 days and I'm having biopsies and I'm doing this and I'm taking shots and I'm on chemotherapy and everything, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
So, and if they said to me, maybe they said it, maybe I didn't hear it because I couldn't hear. But if they said to me, one of the side effects is that you could lose your hearing, I would, had I not, maybe I didn't hear it, but that doesn't mean they didn't say it. I said, and if they didn't say it, they didn't know because I believe that they were dealing with the best knowledge that they had at the time. And more importantly, if I heard them say it, I would have said, you can't hear from 6 feet under in a wooden box. So I would have waved, I would have gone down the road anyway. And it was very hard to be a lawyer for almost 30 years and have him say to me, that doesn't matter, Mike. We can work around this. We'll settle the case. And I was like, well, settle the case? There is no case. Nobody did anything wrong to me. Everybody did the best that they could, and I'm still here, and I'm proof of that. And you want to do this to those people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had that, and I had the death of my friend Sam saying it's better to stay that broken where you're suicidal and you cause 4 deaths rather than move forward And that's okay because and then I lost a second friend to suicide. So it was like a real wake-up call for me. So I tried retirement, and that didn't work out. That worked out fine for the summer.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. And then it got cold. And this is a true story. I was watching daytime TV because I was going out later and later. And at the time, I was watching Kelly Ripa in the morning. So at night, I'm reading books about the Supreme Court. In the morning, I'm reading Kelly Ripa. I'm watching Kelly Ripa. And one day, I turned on the remote to see who our guest was the next day, so I could plan my day. And I was like, "What have you gone out of your mind? You're planning your day around
TV.
This is what you survived cancer for? Are you nuts?" But I had no plan. I had nothing. I mean, it was one day at a time. We didn't plan for retirement. Mike was still working. We didn't plan for retirement. No plan. So I'm watching daytime TV. So I started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, and it was just an amazing, amazing journey. But more importantly, I got myself a job. And because of the thing that affected me the most, which was the suicide of two friends.
Right.
And the fallout from that, I got a job working for a young adult mental health awareness organization. I started to volunteer, and now I'm the office manager.
Nice.
That's
like your passion.
It turned out to be my passion. That, and obviously, I still go to the dermatologist every 45 days. I still have my biopsies. I have, an experiment. I have medication that I have to take and everything for my diabetes. And, that was the other thing that made it very difficult. Your diabetes and the chemotherapy are on a collision course.
Yes.
But, it was sort of interesting for me to suddenly realize as I watched daytime TV that there was no plan for this either. It was just, life was happening. And, in many ways, it's still happening because now I'm old. I'm working here. Mike is now 70. He has gotten me through every day, every single day. One of the habits that I developed as I was going through all this was at night when I go to bed, I take off my slippers and I purposely get down on my knees and push them all the way under the bed. Because then I get down on my knees and I realize how much I have to be grateful for. And in the morning, when I get out of bed, first thing I've got to do is get down on my knees to get my slippers out from under the bed. And the first thing that I see is Mike sleeping on the other side of the bed. And I realize how much I have to be grateful for.
That's awesome.
But I say to myself, would it have been better if we had thought about these things? Two reasons. It would have made the journey that much easier, that much less chaotic, that much less frightening. Nobody's going to plan to get cancer. Nobody's going to plan to go deaf. But you can plan for a catastrophe.
What if?
The what if. What if I can't work? It doesn't matter if I can't work because I have diabetes and I'm losing my eyesight, or I have cancer, or I'm losing my hearing, or I'm just old, or you get arthritis, or who knows?
Or if you have a car accident.
Right.
Or COVID.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But we never plan that. And, but through it all, Michael stayed focused on the need to control the circumstances,
to organize, to keep it
organized, it, to figure out what we were doing and how to move us forward. So when I say there was no plan, Michael always had a focus on the end run. Mm-hmm. So Michael had plan. Michael knew what he had to do. Michael had to manage. Michael had a plan for our retirement. Michael had to give thought. Michael early on encouraged both of us to get long-term care insurance and disability insurance and all of these other things. So he had the plan, but I'm 65 years old. I lived without a plan. I lived reactionary. The two things that I believed, because I had been told young, was that actions have consequences, good, bad, or indifferent, and you have to control those, and you have to figure out how you play the cards that you're dealt. But I never gave any thought to how to play the cards when I got dealt a crappy hand.
Now, is that kind of like the same saying as you made your bed, you can lie in it now?
It's similar. You play the cards you're dealt, so you make good choices, you make bad choices, you tell the dealer to hit you, whatever it is, you got cards now, and you've got to play them. You've got to figure your way out. And, and the other thing was, when things go wrong, you go look in the mirror. When things go wrong, you go look in the mirror. So it wasn't a matter of not having any sense of responsibility or anything, but it was a matter of always reacting, never being proactive. When it hit the fan, but Michael, on the other hand, was always focused on the end run. And that's what got us through. If he didn't plan, if he didn't look forward, if he didn't take stock of the situation and have a plan for moving through it, I don't know if we stayed together. I don't know if we would have stayed together. I don't know what our retirement is. For all I know, we could be eating cat food right now.
Yeah. And that's expensive too.
Yeah, that ain't cheap either, especially the stuff.
No.
But
what kind of final note would you have for our listeners that's brought you to this point in your life? You've helped so many people in mental health, in cancer, and raising money, in trying to find your passion. I think you have many passions. But yeah, what kind of message do you think you would have? Maybe just another LGBTQ partner. Like, what would you have? I mean, what you've gone through is different than what others, especially in that era, because we didn't look at it in the 70s and the 80s the same.
But I think the thing is to take stock of who you surround yourself with, whether it's a same-sex partner or opposite sex partner or whatever. And when you build your life together, understand that it's not all candlelight dinners, and you need to plan for those nights that's not a candlelight dinner. And getting old is not for the faint of heart. So we can all, we're living, what do they call it? Spontaneously.
Yes.
Like a badge of honor. And I did that. I just reacted to everything that happened. And thank God it has a happy ending. But it has a happy ending because I made good, because of the person that I was fortunate enough to be
making choices. You're right.
So I think that we can all live spontaneously for the day, but I think that we all have to recognize that life is not a spectator sport, and that we do have to plan, that we are going to have good days and bad days. And how do we get through the bad days? And how do we capitalize on the good days? How do we know? We don't know what's next. So how do we make sure that we give ourselves as much insurance? And by insurance, I don't necessarily mean health insurance or life insurance or anything else, but just insurance that the people that we care about and the people that care about us get what they need from us in the good times and the bad times.
Wow, that's so beautiful. If this wasn't recorded, I would have recorded that. Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you. Did you have any other final message that you'd like to give the listeners? I mean, that's quite the story.
Yeah, I want to thank people for listening. I hope that, they certainly, if anybody had a question, they could get in touch with me through you or anything. And I just hope that, when you go through this by yourself or alone, it's a waste in many ways. It's not a waste because we come out strong. We come out differently. But if I can help one person do it better than me, because they planned and they thought about it and they were a little bit more introspective and they recognized that it could happen, then it gives what I went through meaning.
Purpose.
And so I just hope that one person, that nobody gets cancer and that nobody needs a plan, but they can all say at the end of the run, Mike told us to plan, and wasn't he a dope because we didn't need a plan. Because the reality of the situation is that's not going to happen, because we all need a plan. We all need to know what it is that we're doing, and we all need to know how it is that we're going to weather the good days and the bad days.
And the bad. Yes, that's perfect. That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you so very much for your passion and helping others. I really, really appreciate that, Mike. And of course, your other Mike has a big point in all of this as well, getting to you to where you're at right now as well. So thanks to your other half. Maybe your better half. I'm not really sure, but
absolutely my better half.
Sometimes we do have better halves.
Yeah, and what he shows is that it takes patience, both with yourself and with us. So I guess the other thing that people should always remember is as they go through these good times and bad times, to have patience.
Patience, yeah. And we all hate patience. I know I do.
So do I.
Yeah, it's tough. We have to wonder why we need patience, but when you're in it, you sure do. So, well, thank you. It's that time again, listeners. I can't believe it's already. We could talk to Mike here forever, I'm sure. You're full of knowledge. You are full of experiences. And I may just have you come back on again at some point in time again, because, it's really beautiful. Unfortunately, you've had to go through what you've had to go through. But at the same time, wow, your experiences can help so many people. So thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
I'd love to come back at your convenience and,
Yeah, and update us and give us some more highlights. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to our show. And take a moment and make sure you click on the subscribe button, share this with others, and click on that bell. And I know one of our other guests makes me want to sing. To click on the bell. There's a bell right beside the subscribe button down here somewhere. Right down there. Right there. So make sure you click on the subscribe. Like this show as well. It helps to make sure that we're getting more of the shows out to other people. And click on that bell, because that really means that you get notified when we come up with more great guests like Mike. And you don't want to miss it. So if you don't click on the bell, you might miss a show. So I want to thank everyone for coming. As you can see, Mike is perfect for expect the unexpected. No one is Superman, and why not look at what we can do today to be better protected for tomorrow? And I coach each and every one because there's nobody that gets out of this life alive, so to speak. And I just want everyone to feel that they don't have to live in stress. They don't have to live in not knowing what to do next, because you've already considered the what if, especially with your friends and family, parents, brothers, sisters, that type of thing, because that's a tough situation to be in after the fact, after the storm has hit. So thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And if you are thinking of someone today that's in your mind that you haven't spoken to, please reach out to them. Tell them how much you love and care about them, because you don't know what tomorrow may bring. And I always end our show with Carol Burnett, because she was the best comedian ever, right, Mike?
So she's the best.
She's the best. I'm so glad we had this time together just to have a laugh or sing a song. Seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes the time we have to say so long. So long, my friends. So long, my listeners. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for coming out. Thank you. You're very, very welcome. Thank you, listeners. Till next time, stay safe. Lots of love.